Hello everyone, Phreak here. For those who don't know me, I'm a Diamond level League of Legends player and a shoutcaster for the North American LCS, which is the North American Pro Scene. If that makes you believe what I say, then great. Let's do some math about 7.19 in League of Legends. For those who don't know, 7.18, which is the previous patch, is going to remain the patch throughout the World Championship, and so we are going to be increasingly at home playing on a different game version than the ones the pros are playing on when they're doing that stuff. What's interesting about this is it means that if there's any champions that are frequently played in the pro scene that are changed in this patch, solo queue is going to feel weird for them. For example, Janna is getting substantial changes, and so we see some Janna in pro play, and we see a lot of Janna in solo queue, and we're going to see a lot of different Janna in solo queue for them, and so they're going to have to rely more on scrims. But my opinion is this is still the right choice, because otherwise the 99.9999999% of players who aren't playing in the World Championship wouldn't get patch updates otherwise. So I wanted to bring out that that's going to be kind of interesting. One thing that I do actually see happen sometimes is there will be a buff or a nerf to a champion so that people will try it because of the new patch, and then they'll realize it was good on the old patch as well. Like, for example, with Zeke's Harbinger, for example, is getting buffed this patch, and we might see it picked up at Worlds, even though it wouldn't have been buffed in that one. And in fact, we already saw Zeke's picked up once at Worlds, so maybe I'm being misleading. Anyway, let's get into 7.19. I think it's a really exciting patch. There's a lot of what I think are good changes. And there's also two small-scale reworks coming in. So first up with the small-scale reworks is Azir. Basically, Azir has had the problem of being insanely strong if you're really, really, really good at Azir, such as at pro play, and then hot garbage if you're not a professional player. And that's a very large difference. So changes are aimed at trying to make him less varied in his results. So health buffs are easy. Basically, if you're not very good at the champion, health makes you live a bit longer. Great, here's the math on his health. It's up 3 to less than 1%. And in fact, the more you buy items, the less this matters. If you buy a Rylaze or a Rod of Ages or something, or a Banshee's Veil, this means even less. So, hey, it exists. It's not massive, quite obviously. And that's okay. 10 more move speed, also, decent. Move speed ends up being actually a pretty good stat for pro play because rotations matter. So, hey, whatever. Okay, so that's a straight buff. Substantial changes to Azir Q. Okay, the range has gone down by 150, but the spear length, meaning roughly the, I'm assuming, roughly the hitbox of the actual Q skill shot has gone up. So, if you're actually trying to stab someone with a Q, that range went from 1175 to 1090. So the actual poke power didn't go down quite as much, but you certainly can't send it nearly as far. Now this matters for sending it out to get auto attacks as well as sending it out to dash to it. So his dash range went down and his poke range went down just by not quite as much. Talk more about range changes. This range also went down 140, which is the W auto attack range, which is about as much as this range went down. So you are clearly losing range in this champion. Okay, so the cooldown got increased on its scaling. That said, you're maxing Q first anyway in basically all cases. I don't think you would ever do anything but that. So once you're level 9, in fact, once you're level 7, it's a buff. Just a larger buff at level 9. It's just a little bit weaker in the early game. Also, this Q damage has gone up pretty substantially. So again, at level 9, you have a pretty reliable 190 damage nuke, which is more than it was before, with a 5-second cooldown, but the ratio is lower. Okay, so let's start digging into these changes. Okay, well, again, here's the damage table, and because the AP ratio got nerfed, you can see this purple column right here, how much ability power you have to buy for the damage to be nerfed compared to before. 25 AP at level 1 will happen with Adorad's Ring and Glyphs, or Quints rather, Glyphs 2. But then at rank 2, 3, 4, and 5, it requires substantial investment to make this worse than this base damage increase. So for a large portion of the mid game, the Q is stronger. And for a large portion of the mid game, the Q is stronger cooldown-wise once you suffer through the first 2 levels of the ability. So the Q got better for most cases. Super late game Q poke is worse. Also, again, shorter range. Shorter range is a really relevant point here. Azir is currently garbage, so he needs to be buffed overall. The health buff, the move speed buff are obviously buffs. The Q changes with losing range, it's hard to say. Landing phase probably a little bit better as a result. And then there's substantial W changes. All right, so the range went down by 140. The cast range went up a little bit so that you can cast it at closer to max range, right? Because before it had an 800 range, you cast at 450, so you would have to Q to get it to do any damage. Now you cast at 500, and the max is only 660 anyway, so you're more likely to be able to actually get the auto off with the W. So this is actually a buff. Obviously, this is a nerf. I'm not saying things that you don't know already, but again, it's all in the same direction. And then there's a giant table of the W base damage changing, which instead of reading this table, just look at my table, or looking at the list of numbers. So here's the old damage, here's the new damage. You can see it's a buff for the vast majority of the game. Again, much like the Q changes, where it's a buff for the substantial portion of the mid-game, it's a buff for the substantial portion of the mid-game. Now, yes, at level 16 and higher, the damage is slightly lower, but not, I mean, this is down by 2, this is down by 6, this is down by 10. And at this point, you should be having like 400 ability power, so the actual nerf is much, much smaller. Yes, technically your Q does less damage, technically your W does less damage. I guess theoretically his end game is slightly worse, kind of, if you're only looking at raw damage numbers. Obviously the range portion matters as well. But if you're able to get 3 soldiers out, and keep in mind the ammo recharge is generally shorter, if you're able to ever get 3 soldiers out, when you summon a third while you have 2 on the field, right? So I want to point out the wording very closely, right? It's a 5-second buff as soon as you summon number 3. So if one of the other ones times out right away, you still keep the buff. Okay, so he lost kind of some damage late game, but he gained a giant attack speed bonus. So higher DPS, definitely. Higher DPS, definitely. Again, range is shorter, higher DPS, definitely. Sum total of these changes is, oh my god, you are such a better team fighter, as long as you can deal with the range changes. Let's keep going. Now there's weaker pass-through damage. The way Azir W auto attacks works is you click a target, and it hits that target, it hits everything in a line through it. You can actually stab beyond your primary target. As a result, it's kind of like Twitch R, and now suddenly there is reduced damage to targets that aren't the one you actually tried to stab. So here's the table. Again, looking at the W numbers, look at the far right side of this table. Look at the W numbers. Now, how good or bad is his wave clear? Right, and this is actually really substantial. Okay, your Q damage went up, that's cute. Okay, you get some free attack speed sometimes. Your costs maybe get a bit better. Actually, they don't, but whatever. But the wave clear is halved for the first 5 levels. Right, his W does half damage. Even after the base damage gets increased by 15%, the fall-off damage is so high, suddenly he does not cut down minion waves nearly as fast. And this is really big. I'm pretty sure this is really, really, really big, because before Azir wave cleared for freaking free. You press W, you press Q, suddenly all the minions are dead. This is super simple. This couldn't possibly be easier. And now he does half damage to the other 2 minions he's not hitting. That's the primary target. That's really meaningful. And I am not a good Azir player, nor a good mid laner, so I can't tell you how much this really, really means, but my instinct is, holy moly. But again, once you're level 11, you're back to full damage. Once, the landing phase doesn't really exist anymore, once you're back into team fights. So his team fight AoE in the later games certainly much, much closer to normal. And again, you can see between level 6 and 11 or 6 and 10, it's at 90% effectiveness, so you're not really losing out on too much, right? Not a huge problem. It's 90% as effective, so not as big of an issue. Okay. So wave clear got blasted, range got blasted, still way higher teamfight DPS as long as you're in range. Okay. Shield got a giant AP ratio added. That's kind of nice. Also, it gets the shield immediately. You don't have to necessarily hit a champion. So if you're getting ganked by a Lee Sin and you WE away, you're just getting the shield. You have to time it well because it only lasts 1.5 seconds instead of 4. But I would generally say that as long as you're not hot garbage, this is definitely a buff. Also, you get a free W charge if you do land an E. So, again, if you screw up, this makes it a nerf. But if you don't screw up, these are all buffs. So that's cool. Again, Azir needs buffs, so that's a buff. This is hard to read into. Again, the range is kind of difficult to talk about in a proper way. But this seems like, okay, Azir might have really gotten buffed. And then Shurima bumper cars are gone. Basically, the way the R works now is it is damage and a knockback, and then once it reaches final destination, it is now an Anivia wall. It no longer knocks back, it is just impassable terrain. Kha'Zix and Lee Sin players rejoice. If you wait out the ulti, you can then go over it. I actually think this is a good nerf. I think this helps make Azir less BS. But as compensation, the cooldown and the wall size get quite a bit nicer. Here's the table, percent difference in cooldown, percent difference in width over here. Right, you're getting pretty substantial changes. So the ultimate is more usable, just does less things. And of course, in the previous patch in 7.18, the ultimate damage got increased. So, I mean, ultimately, it seems pretty decent. Do I think Azir is probably still too weak to play in solo queue without being an expert? Yeah, probably. My instinct is Azir needs more buffs. I think the overall changes, once people acclimate to the range differences, keep in mind also there's going to be a lot of bad Azir players picking up Azir and sucking at the champion. I expect a day one win rate to go down maybe 3%. I expect by the end of the patch, though, like by the end of the 2 weeks of 7.19, that the actual win rate of Azir is going to be the same as it was before the changes, and then he'll probably get buffed from there in 7.20, or 7.20 or 7.21 or something. That's my estimate. We'll see what happens. That's one change. All right, we're one champion into the patch update. Let's keep going. Xin Zhao getting a substantial update as well. All right, and I think there's just some pretty cool mechanics here. Let's go into them. All right, so base attack speed buff on Xin Zhao. Here you go. Here's the table. Weaker in the early game. Most notably worth noting that his base attack speed is 4.6% lower, which means his eventual end game scaling is also going to be weaker. It means that, all attack speed you buy is 4.6% worse. But the nice thing is you get so much more attack speed per level that he just innately gets a lot more attack speed by the end of the game. This is, of course, fought by the fact that he has attack speed steroids on his kit, which used to be his W. Now it's his E. Spoilers. And the value of that attack speed is slightly diminished. By the tune, again, of 4.6%. And if you're going to buy like a Trinity Force or a Blade of the Ruin King or against his Rage Blade, all those items are a bit weaker. It is probably still worth buying those types of items, but a change like this slightly pushes him towards going for a Black Cleaver Titanic Hydra kind of build, pushing him more towards, Warrior Cleaver Tank, that kind of stuff, because attack speed is slightly less important. You might still build the same, but you are getting pushed toward that build. Okay. He's getting a new passive. His old armor shred is gone. He's getting basically the old W damage, just with different numbers, and he's still getting the heal the W used to give him. So let's look at the numbers of that. Okay, well, I assumed here that you maxed W second. I looked at statistics online. His most common build order was to max Q, then max W. So I assumed the old Xin Zhao would have maxed W second, because he usually did, and I used that as my basis for comparison. What's interesting is the W crit people for percentage of his total attack damage, and the passive now just does damage based on total attack damage, so it's a very easy comparison. The table is the amount of damage dealt with just his base stats, though the percentages line up with the total AD ratio change, so they're very clean overall. It is a slightly weaker ability in the early game. Xin Zhao often did start W at level 1, so, that actually existed from level 1. You can see this where the breakpoints are. It's a buff in the mid game, then a nerf again, and then it's slightly better in the end game. I mean, truthfully, it's a bit weaker in the jungle clear early on, which, to be fair, was kind of rough for Xin Zhao. He wasn't like the sexiest early game jungle clear, but he could do it. It was just kind of slow from what I saw. Anyway, it's about the same, right? The numbers roughly line up. Yeah, there's some differences up and down, but the numbers line up pretty well, so whatever. Like, to me, it's kind of whatever. Again, the ability heals. I'm assuming the heal is the same as the damage dealt. Now, in the W, the heal was a flat amount. Now it's the third attack heals Xin Zhao, and I don't know what the number is here. I'm assuming it's this. I'm assuming it's the damage. And if that's the case, then here's the table, where it heavily scales with game time, because if it scales based on your total attack damage, as the W damage deals, then it scales up quite a lot, which again means a much less healthy early clear. This table to the right, if the numbers are lower than before, well, there might have been an AP ratio increase to buff for it, and again, the attack damage to buff is like 10, so throughout small parts of the late early game or the early mid game, you've got some buffs. And then also in this little area right here where the ability would have been ranked up as the old champion and, hasn't gotten the level 16 scaling yet. It could be nerfed if you have too much attack damage. Okay, whatever. I mean, ultimately, you have less healing early game, more healing late game. Just generally speaking, that's just the case. That's just generally true. So, okay, great. Also, again, keep in mind with the passive changes, he lost the armor shred. And so target armor on the left, how much more physical damage you would have dealt with the percent armor pen on the right, armor shred. Keep in mind this is damage not only for you, but any physical damage teammates hitting a guy you're hitting. So against the tanks, it's a 10 to 12% damage increase for you and any physical damage teammates, which does mean it's a sort of meaningful difference. And again, the fact that even if you're just, ganking a Caitlyn in the bot lane who has 40 armor, you are losing your 5% extra damage as a result. This is not a trivial nerf, right? This does matter. So the passive roughly makes up for all the W passive stuff. The attack speed, I mean, it roughly ends up being the same attack speed, across the overall state of the game, though slightly nerfing purchases, of course. And you're losing some damage amp against your primary target. So far this looks like a small nerf overall. Oh, and 3 Talon Strike's getting nerfed as well. The rank 1 damage is roughly the same, with those losing the total attack damage ratio, but it's getting a bonus attack damage ratio. Now I want to point out that 3 Talon Strike had a 15 damage per rank up per hit level up. Now it's a 5 damage per rank up per hit level up. So the level up got smashed on Q. And he lost the total attack damage ratio. So here's the damage of, it's Xin Zhao's total AD plus the Q damage. Individual hit is this table. You can see that Q does, as a function of the fact that you had to auto attack to do it, 2/3 to 15% to 2/3 less damage. If you buy some attack damage, you can buff the numbers because the bonus attack damage ratio is there. But as you can see, the amount of damage required is very, very, very high. 300 bonus attack damage does not happen in League of Legends. So Q does less damage. Now, again, you're going to be having a warrior enchant. You're going to be having a black cleaver in there and whatnot. So, that by itself is 105 attack damage. So you're getting it closer. You're getting it closer, but I mean, this is not massive. You are not going to be buffing the damage. Xin Zhao Q does less damage. Okay, so far we are still nerfing Xin Zhao. We've nerfed him via the passive interaction. We've nerfed him via the Q. Where the Xin Zhao buffs that we were promised, Riot, and it's here. He has an entirely new extra ability. Keep in mind that his passive just gained his old W passive, and the E actually gained the old W active. So he got to keep his entire W and then gained a new ability. Is his new W better than his old passive? Yes. His new W is better than his old passive. Okay, he gains a giant slash and thrust that deals like up to 240 damage with a 1.15 total attack damage ratio. Also, the cast time is reduced by attack speed, which is good, much like how Yasuo Q works. So, holy moly, this is an entire ability. That seems good. Also, enemies hit by the thrust are slowed by 50% for 1.5 seconds. So it's damage and a slow. And the damage on the actual ability is actually pretty nice. Oh, I missed it? Oh, no, this is it. Sorry, I'm an idiot. Yeah, so here's the table on the how much damage the W deals. And keep in mind, this has a 1.15 total attack damage ratio. So again, if you buy a Black Cleaver and a Warrior Enchant, you're doing like another 120 damage on this ability. So the base damage is already at level 1 with no items at all, it's 126, which is quite a lot of damage. And then it gets better from there. Obviously, it goes into the 300s, and it's going to go into the 400s for you, and maybe even the 500s for you once you get into a full build with Runes and Masteries, maybe an Infernal Drake or something. So, oof, this is a heavy-hitting spell. Xin Zhao has a pretty big nuke, again, and it's a 1.5 second slow, which takes over the slow from the Audacious Charge. So, okay, that's pretty meaningful. Okay, oh baby, that's a giant buff. That is an ability right there. Audacious Charge getting some updates as well. Because the W gets the slow, now the on-click E no longer gets it. That said, the E will hit confirm your W because you'll slow them, and then cast W, get the big slow. So you're going to be fine. It's going to work just wonderfully for you. Damage nerfed a little bit. I actually failed to add that table in. Sorry about that. But you're going to 1 point E for a large portion of the game. Thing is, Q still has the 1 second cooldown level up incentive. It goes from 9 to 5 second cooldown based on rank. Even though the damage sucks, the cooldown might be worth still putting points into. The W, you're probably maxing first because it's gaining 45 damage per rank up, which is quite a lot. Whereas Q gains 15 damage per rank up, and the E gains 25 damage per rank up. So there's reason to max your W. But hey, the E got cheaper. The E now gets the attack that his W gained. So if you wanted to get more attack speed, what's interesting though is again, if you want to get more attack speed, you can max E for 5% per point, or you can max Q for the lower cooldown to get your E up faster. So you're probably maxing E less because the damage level up went from plus 40 to plus 15. So you're probably not, or plus 25, sorry, I misspoke. You're probably maxing E less, you're probably maxing W first, you're probably maxing Q second. So a lot of your stuff moves around, but W's a really cool ability. So this seems like a buff for Xin Zhao so far. And now he has a new ability on the ultimate. He no longer gets bonus resists, but he knocks people around in a circle. And then if you are outside the circle, he doesn't take any damage from you. So basically, you have to walk into melee range of Xin Zhao if you want to hurt him at all. Yes, you can kite away from this, obviously, but if Xin Zhao and Jarvan are on the same team, you might not have that ability anymore. There's a decent chance it's a really, really sick ability. It's really hard to say. It is going to mitigate some damage. It just has to. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you see like a Karthus ult coming, it probably blocks Karthus ultimate. Originated from champions further than 450 away, so I'm pretty sure. So if you're like, oh crap, Karthus ulting, you can just like press R and be immune to it. Or if you like see an Ashe arrow coming or something, right? If you got rooted in place by a Maokai, you just hit this button and now they all have to get into range of you, and it's going to be way more damage mitigated than your bonus armor and armor would have been. So even if you just snap cast it, I think there's more done with this ability. This is pretty strong. All right, we're 2 champions in. Let's keep going. Aatrox buffs. All right, I think Aatrox, by the way, is already pretty strong. So at this point, he's now just overpowered. He's unstoppable during Darkflight's descent. You can't flay him out of his dash downwards. He's getting more range during the R. These aren't giant buffs. Like, they only come into play a couple times a game, but pretty sure Aatrox is OP. This is nice. Back to big changes again. Caitlyn getting substantial changes to her base stats. Okay, her health got smashed, but she got more health per level. She got her old attack speed stuff back. Let's look at the table. Caitlyn's health got smashed. She has 90% the health she did before at level 1. That is really substantial. If you land the all-in, she gets banged. Dang, that's really meaningful. And she does scale up to be slightly higher at level 13. But, man, I mean, dual laners don't gain a lot of levels really quickly, so for most of the game, she is squishier and substantially so in the early game. And again, she gets some attack speed changes. I want to point out, actually, they had done the math wrong in the 17 or whatever, 16 changes. She actually had 624 at level 1, not 625. Doesn't matter that much, but technically it actually is a buff. And so you can see just on her base stat changes right here, the left side of the chart, you get some pretty meaningful gains, right? You get up to actually 1.0 attacks per second by the end of it all, which is up to a 25% attack speed increase. This means quite a lot. And then even in a full build where you got a lot more attack speed, it still means a lot. You're still like 8 to 16% more attack speed. This is assuming, by the way, Berserker's Greaves, Static Shiv, and Rapid Fire Cannon as your 3 attack speed items, which is like 110%, I think, total attack speed gained. Something like that. The actual numbers are in there. But anyway, this is a buff, obviously, very, very clearly. It's a buff to Caitlyn. A lot more attack speed gain. She's back to her old value. She's back to being an insanely good team fighter as a result, as long as you don't punish her early game too substantially by her being insanely squishy in the early game. Okay, Headshot now works on turrets, so that's also just a straight buff. If you just took these 2 things, it would be a Caitlyn buff. I think you could suffer through the health pool differences and just, be a better champion. Oh yeah, and the Q nerf's getting reverted. Okay, wow, that's also a buff. Okay, so she's getting stronger, which, to be fair, she's hot garbage, so she's getting stronger. Large changes to Yordle Snap Trap. Okay, the duration got cut. The damage got changed to something that requires math. The reveal duration got cut, and then the cooldown got buffed in many of the cases until it's maxed. Okay, what's this all mean? Okay, well, let's look at the trap damage. Okay, the base damage on the traps is what you're looking at right here with the percent diff column. You can see it's all within about 2%. Okay, at the highest possible point, it's 5% if you didn't. This is when you max it second because you did max it second. Basically, a no-item Caitlyn traps do the same things. They're a bit weaker in the laning phase. They get technically a little bit stronger towards the mid to late game if you never bought any items. Okay, the trap base damage is the same. Okay. So what actually happened? Okay, well, if you buy bonus attack damage, and Caitlyn kind of tops out at plus 100, you can go higher than that, right? If you go for a Lord Dominic's and a Bloodthirster, you start going into like the plus 210 territory or plus like 190 territory. But plus 100 is like Infinity Edge plus a Doran's Blade plus Runes and Masteries. You start at like plus 15 or so with Doran's Blade and Runes, and it gets higher from there. So If you do buy attack damage, you can see that the nerf is actually greater. You can see, right, this is 97% becomes 93%. So, right, if she gets like a BF Sword Recall at level 6, goes back to lane, the traps are even more nerfed than before. It's to the tune of 8%, not 5%. But once you get yourself into the mid to late game, right, once you start maxing it out, once you actually have some real items, traps do more damage. And again, as we saw from the attack speed buffs, her late game attack speed also higher as well. So, okay, her late game got better. Her early game, you know, not as substantially changed, and actually nerfed via the traps. So, okay, laning phase may be less oppressive. Oh yeah, and the big change right here is this, which is that the cooldown, though it's better in the early game and then a bit weaker in the late game, the duration got absolutely slaughtered. Rank 1 traps only last 1 wave instead of 3. You can get them back sooner. You get 1 trap every time 1 dies off. But, oh man, they don't stick around in the lane nearly as long. This is the most meaningful nerf to her early game that could have happened. I actually wish, going back in time, this was the change that was done to Caitlyn at like 7:15 or whatever. This would have been the change to make traps less oppressive. Like, yeah, you can get your cooldowns kind of low and, you know, they can last still a minute by the end game. But this is the change that I wish happened at the beginning. So I'm glad this is finally happening now. Her still being very, very squishy because she has 650 range, I think is fine. I think it's still a pretty cool change. Makes sense. I don't think she needed to be, you know, more durable than before at the end game. But whatever, they just close clean numbers is not that big of a deal. This is meaningful. This really hits her early game. In a meaningful way, so that, you know, she can get her attack speed back. But oh baby, some total of changes. This is still probably a buff to Caitlyn. Yes, the W is less abusive, but she gets her old Q back. She gets her old attack speed back. She can headshot on turrets. She can still push really hard. And I don't think, you know, the health nerf makes up for that. This still ends up being a buff to Caitlyn. Thing is, I actually think what's weird is I actually think Caitlyn is still going to be underpowered and require buffs. Now, for pro play, maybe not, but pro play is not playing on 719 ever. So, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, she's going to be sub 50 in solo queue. She's like 45% solo queue right now. Like, champion's hot garbage in solo queue. This is a big enough change to, like, make up for this. So she just ends up being squishier. I mean, again, this is really, really big, to be fair. I mean, I do think she is buffed in solo queue. Like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, okay, W is abusive, but it wasn't that insane. It was big, but it wasn't that insane. This is a super, super substantial buff. So, okay, she's definitely going to gain win rate. But she'll probably be at like 47, 48 instead of 45. But I believe very strongly she will not be overpowered. All right. Another chamber with big changes. I mean, I love big changes. They're really fun to like piece through, but they make this video really long. Okay. Janna has 7 lines of text just for her base stats. Okay, her attack range is now standard marksman attack range. But her attack damage and attack damage growth got nerfed. But she gained attack speed and missile speed. So she's better at attacking, but the damage got nerfed. Her base health got buffed, but her base health or her health growth got nerfed. So let's look at what that means. Janna's health is up 7% at level 1, but she is definitely squishier into the end game. And pretty substantially so. I mean, 1700 max health is really, really low. Now, Janna does not hit level 18 basically ever when playing League of Legends. So, you know, you're going to cap out at like 12 or 13, and then it's not nearly as meaningful because you're going to have a Sight Stone, which gives you 200 health, and you're going to have... Okay, that's like the only health item Janna ever buys. Maybe a Redemption. Okay, that's another 200 health or something. So this gets softened a little bit when you actually buy items. But wow, Janna lost well, Janna gained, I should say, really, a truckload of health in the early game. It's the opposite of the Caitlyn changes, basically. Okay, but what about her attack damage and attack speed and stuff? Okay, well, you can look at her attack speed. Not an insane gain, right? She's still 6.25 base, but she gets 4% more attack speed by the end of it all. She almost gets to 1.0, which is like pretty like solid marksman attack speed. So, okay, she gains some attack speed. You won't really notice it. I mean, right, it's like 1-2% for most of the game because, again, you're not going to get anything past level 13 in most cases. But, okay, she gains some attack speed, whatever, it doesn't mean anything. What about this attack damage change? Well, wait, we've got to read something first. Janna now gets her own move speed bonus from Tailwind, so she's really fast at all times. And then her basic attacks and single target spells, which means her W. So her basic attacks and her W gain 35% of her total bonus movement speed as damage. And again, because Tailwind counts, it means it's 9.4 damage at level 1. Ah, let's look at this table. All right, so here's the table of her old raw attack damage and her new attack damage plus the Tailwind bonus. Now, I'm assuming here you're maxing W second. I'm actually bolding the numbers 8, 10, 12, and 13 for that premise. For some reason, I assumed you learned W at level 3, I think is why this spikes up right here. So I forgot to bold the number 3 because I'm bad. My apologies. Oh well. And then the vertical lines are buying Boots of Speed at level 6 and buying Boots of Lucidity at level 11, which is where these spikes come in again. So assuming you're buying boots at a relatively normal tempo, you are doing more damage on hit than before. If you ever use like a Righteous Glory or a Talisman of Ascension or something, you get more out of this. Keep in mind, once you cast W, you lose the W move speed bonus. So this number cuts back down. I didn't include that in the table, but oh well. But it's interesting, I guess, to think about. You don't want to cast W at the start of a fight if you can help it, I guess, because you'll lose out on auto attack damage. Okay, so she has more health at level 1 through level 6. She has more attack speed. She has more auto attack damage. Okay, and she has more attack range. We're buffing Janna. Stay tuned. Okay, Howling Gale. Mana cost decrease. Cooldown flattened. And by the way, Q was typically maxed last, so a cooldown flattening on a champion who never reaches level 18 is a buff. The Q range got increased from 850 to 7 to 1000. Okay, that's a buff. And then I don't know how to parse this properly. So what it says is basically a fully charged Q, right, moves faster. It reaches end duration in 1.5, just like it would reach the short duration in 1.5. I don't know how long it took the Q to move in the first place. I don't really know the speed of the tornado. I'm going to assume, I have no idea if it's true or not. Right, well, there's one of 3 options, right? It's either the snap cast took 1.5 seconds, which means we've buffed the full channel version. It means the full channel version took 1.5 seconds, which means we've nerfed the snap cast, or it's somewhere in between. And I have no idea which one of these is true. I'm sure someone on PvE tested it. I'm sure some of you actually know this answer. I don't know. I didn't look into it. I'm assuming it's going to be a partial buff and a partial nerf, like it's somewhere in the middle. I don't know for sure, though. But, okay, anyway, a full charge Q is almost definitely buffed, though. I mean, at very worst, the range is better. So this is probably overall buff. I mean, Q got overall buffed. Her passive got overall buffed. Her base stats got overall buffed. So, okay, let's read her W. Okay, well, the cooldown went down, but the slow went down. This is hard to debate, actually, which one's better and worse, because you weren't using Zephyr every, 8 seconds on cooldown anyway. And so the slow duration being nerfed actually is meaningful, because, hey, you lost 1/3 of the slow duration. That's meaningful. That matters. 100% that matters. What's also cute, by the way, is... never mind. That doesn't line up. Okay, then she lost a lot of the move speed on the passive. Now keep in mind, she gained 8% for free, and she keeps that 8%. So it actually went from 9 to 17 to 14 to 18, but you only lose half when you cast the ability. So the overall move speed on Zephyr via the passive changes got buffed, assuming that you'll roll the passive changes back into the overall kit changes. The range is now measured by hitbox sizes. This means that she hits Cho'Gath from farther away, but doesn't really mean much for bot lane encounters for the most part. Yeah, which is the description right there. And then, the damage change got reverted. Oh god, this is a giant buff. Okay, so my notes are going to be wrong here. So here's the table on the Q mana cost and Q cooldown, by the way. And again, you're never going to reach level 17 or 18 to make this a nerf in terms of the cooldown difference. So it's just a strict buff to the costs and stuff. And again, you're also using it at rank 1 the entire time for the most part. So you have this substantial 30 mana cost difference for the entire time as well. So you have 2 seconds and 30 mana cost off for almost all intents and purposes. Okay, so the W damage, I thought there was going to be a damage nerf. That got reverted apparently, or it's mislisted. I'm not sure which. This is actually assuming there was a damage nerf on the ability. So this is now incorrect. But basically, W does an insanely large amount of extra damage. I think the rank 1 is the same, and then it had a per level nerf. Anyway, W does a lot more damage now as a result. Okay, we're buffing Janna. And the only nerf is Eye of the Storm's shield cooldown is increased by 86420 seconds, which is this, of course. This does matter, because this was what she maxed first. It was her bread and butter ability. But once you reach level 9, it is no longer a nerf, and everything else is still a buff. this is a meaningful nerf to her laning phase. It is. It is a meaningful nerf to her laning phase. An 18-second cooldown on your shield is a really long cooldown. You get 1 per wave now. And so it does limit options somewhat. Yes, you can try to all in the support. The Janna herself, of course, has more health though. Or you can all in the marksman once the shield is down. But it's hard for me to think that this change is enough to make up for everything else that got buffed about Janna. Like, and I know like up here there's a context thing saying they expect it to be a power down for Janna and they're prepared to do more if it's not the case. I think this ends up being a buff for the champion. Now, I do want to point out, by the way, that it's not like Janna is a big attack damage threat, right? It's not like she's going to suddenly... It's not like it's attack speed Lulu or like Teemo top or something. Like if Teemo got this shit, this would be insane. It's not Teemo, it's Janna. Like, okay, yes, Janna is better at autoing. She's better at harassing. Harass means more. Her Q is stronger. Her W is stronger, and it does more damage. But it's still Janna. Like... You know, people's perception of the champion is going to change. She's definitely going to be more of a threat. Like, this is still going to add up to something. She will be a better laner by herself, but she loses some of her laning tools with the E cooldown. But as soon as you hit level 9, as long as the laning phase went okay, she gets to keep her E, be the same, and everything else is better. I mean, we'll have to wait and see, but this feels like a buff to me. All right, onwards to Malphite. W is tripled while his passive is standing, but the passive armor is slightly nerfed by 5% flat at all ranks. This was a little bit difficult and annoying to do the math for. Here's what it is, okay? Assuming you're full health and your passive is standing, and your W is rank 1 because Malphite maxes W last, you are 1.73 times as durable by having 50 armor. This counts 50 armor itself, as well as the W amp, as well as the passive shield. If you had 300 armor, you were 4.9x as durable against physical damage, counting rank 1 W, counting the passive shield being fully standing, etc., etc. Well, in 7.19, that 15% becomes 10%. And so you are 172% as durable instead of 173% as durable. You can see there's a small nerf because obviously it got nerfed. Oh, and this counts, by the way, the triple shield value, like the triple armor, the 30% on the first shield. It's still a nerf. What this means is you have the passives to buff. You need to basically regenerate another 2 to 3 passives before it's a buff. Which means, though, if you're playing Malphite against Pantheon, and you generate this passive shield a second, a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, this is now a buff. And for what it's worth, this is the number before all the buffs, so 50 would actually be 65 with old Malphite, or 60 with new Malphite, or in truth, 80 with new Malphite, or whatever the number actually is. I'm sure that number's wrong, but whatever. Yeah. If you regenerate the passive, you are then more durable. If you do not regenerate the passive, you are not as durable. And of course, if the passive is shredded by magic damage, like you get hit by a Victor laser, you are substantially less durable. Now, he does have armor ratios on some of his offensive abilities. So, if he's got the shield up and he ults you and he hits the buttons and he hits the W. And by the way, I did not count the W active, which I believe the W active gives some even more armor. I could be wrong about that. I forgot to read the tooltip properly. Sorry about that. So, right, there are, and because, again, you have some level of control over the effect, you pick a Malphite into a Riven or into a Renekton or into a Pantheon. Because you can keep your passive shield on and then ult in and do damage with your E and other active abilities that deal damage, there are ways to make use of this even if you only ever go through one passive. I mean, as it stands anyway, Malphite is still a 1% win rate champion. He's actually stronger than average. So, I mean, anything like this actually seems like a good idea anyway. If you can nerf the average win rate but make him better in the cool situations, that's a win regardless. So, great. Orianna's another example of a champion who is getting changed in a meaningful way in solo queue, yet still is a champion that gets played some in pro play. I'm very glad this change is happening. The abilities no longer fire early on the way to the end location. Because before, they would, like, the ball, like, let's say the ball wants to go here, and it's moving. It would get to here, distance would cast there, then the ball would complete moving. And same with Shockwave. It would cast at the end point early. I know that was done on purpose to make the champion feel snappier or whatever, but this is why no one could ever dodge Orianna's abilities. They literally cheated. They literally cheated. So W and R no longer cheat. That said, the Q moves like 15% faster, which means you don't need to cheat. It gets there anyway. Plus, the Q itself is now just a better ability. Now, it's interesting. Q is actually one of these slower missiles in the game, but because it has no cast time and doesn't have to originate from Orianna, it needs to be slow to be anywhere near fair. And to be fair, Orianna, after the most recent changes, is actually slightly weak. She's not getting played in pro play really at all. So getting slight buffs is okay. W, R don't cheat, but the Q moves faster, meaning W and R are probably roughly the same, and then Q is just straight up better. That's my read on the situation. We'll see if that ends up being the case. I mean, the Q will definitely feel way snappier, and it'll be way harder to dodge, and that'll be a thing. And, we'll see what it looks like. I assume this is going to end up being Orianna buff slightly as a result of all these changes. Unless you're doing really short-range Qs into R, but that probably won't matter much anyway. Buffs to Ornn, his base mana and his mana costs are all getting better. That's kind of nice. His little mini UI has a thing, but whatever. His recommended items are updated. Okay, that might help a little bit. Yeah, so some mana costs, right? Here's his mana pool. It's up by 10% at level 1. More than that. Q rank up. You tend to rank Q pretty early. Actually, I forget if you actually rank Q early. I actually don't remember. I'm not an Ornn player, so I might be wrong. I think you max W first, and then I think you max Q or E second, and I'm not sure which one you actually do. So this might mean nothing for most Ornn players, especially support Ornn players. But hey, the E cost down by 10 is kind of nice, so this is supposed to be E net W. Okay, next changes. Vayne is actually roughly balanced. So let's go into what the Vayne changes are, because they are a little bit mathy, which is my specialty. She gets a buff to her Q damage by flat 20% at all ranks. A change to her W, it's nerfed until level rank 5, which is level 13. Actually, to be honest, this is probably a big enough buff that you might actually go back to maxing W first. I know, like, before a lot of the changes to Tumble a while ago, they would often get like 2 points in Q by like level 4, and then would max W at 5, 7, 8, 9 to cap out the ability. You might go back to this as a result because of how good rank 1 Q and rank 2 Q are now as a result. Right, the incremental buff to Q is smaller, so you might see ability orders change. Let's go to the math, though. Also, the minimum damage got increased and then decreased on Silverbolt. So what does this all mean? Okay, well, here's the Q table. This is her base attack damage, and of course, everything scales equally because it's just a totally D ratio with no base damage on it. The ability does 15 to 13% more damage. Tumble is better. Great. Now, you don't usually buy a lot of raw attack damage on Vayne, so, 126 becomes 143. It's not insane. Every 100 attack damage you buy adds 20 to this number. Not exactly insane. But because the Tumble bonus damage no longer crits, which it never probably should have, if it was going to crit, or if you do crit, there is a damage nerf, obviously. What's nice is the numbers roughly equal out to at rank, or at level 9, at rank 5. If you have 50% crit chance, like you have for whatever reason an Essence Reaver and a Static Shiv, I don't know, I'm just making things up, it's basically equivalent. This is the same buff as the same nerf. That said, if you're doing Infinity Edge double crit items, that build is weaker. Infinity Edge Static Shiv Rapid Fire Cannon is now weaker on Vayne. Your early game's stronger because you can't have that much crit that early, and even if you have just an Infinity Edge, that Vayne is stronger too because you typically don't crit. But if you have it, once you're at IE plus Zeal, once you're at Infinity Edge plus Zeal, this is now a nerf. But up until then, it is a buff. So there's that. There's that math. And this might change her item build. It might not. I mean, this is not a gigantic nerf, obviously. Also, this is not counting Infinity Edge as a crit damage. It's counting just double damage crit. So it's actually worse, again, with Infinity Edge in there. And then the W changes again. Weaker early percentage damage, higher early minimum damage. Okay, so here's the table of the old damage and the new damage. There's a difference, right? Again, if W is rank 1 for a lot longer, you do a lot less damage with it against the tanks and whatnot. So getting level 13 is important. Or again, maxing W first is important because that table right here. And then this table on the little bit on the right, okay? To read it, because the minimum damage got increased, but the percent health damage ratio got nerfed, if they have less than 833 health, it is a buff because the minimum damage is higher. 833 is the amount of damage or amount of health someone had to have for the old W to deal the new minimum damage. Right, so if you're hitting someone with less than 833 health, it is a buff, which means in the laning phase, for basically all intents and purposes, hitting champions or hitting minions, W does more damage. At rank 2, that number is 867. At 3, it's equal than nerfed. But so in the laning phase, rank 1 and 2 W are better. If you don't cap them out within reasonable time, a 1000 HP Cinderholt Gragas is going to take less damage from you. You will do less damage to those guys. You do have to scale up more, so you're a bit more tumble reliant in the early game to kill tanks and just kill big targets, but Silverbolts serves you a bit better in the early game against the squishier targets. At rank 3 of the abilities, we could just go through the table. The minimum damage is the same, and then once they have about 900 health, you do less damage, so you do less damage. At rank 4 of the ability, both the percent health damage and the minimum damage are weaker, so it's just nerfed. And then at rank 5 of the ability, the minimum damage is worse, but the total damage on a high health target is the same. And realistically, any level 9 champion is going to have 900 health. Not any, but almost all of them will. Actually, I'm pretty sure. So we'll look at like Janna and Caitlyn, for example, earlier on in this table. Janna's health at level 9 was 997. Caitlyn, oops, I scrolled past it. Caitlyn health at level 9, 1048. So again, level 9 champions don't have that little health. Hey, it's weaker at last hitting minions. You're losing out on some of the minimum damage against like killing caster minions, but you should kill them in 3 auto attacks anyway. 3 autos plus Silverbolts doing 110 or whatever should be enough regardless, so shouldn't be an issue. End result, I think this ends up being... I think this is, again, it's a buff to her early game and a nerf to her late game. This is a buff to her early game and a nerf to a small part of her mid game. I think her ability order probably changes because bumping your minimum damage is nice, and also just, you know, getting the scaling up quickly is nice. I don't know, it's hard to say. Again, Vayne is roughly balanced, but she's going to be weaker with that Infinity Edge build, so you might see her go back towards like a Ruin King, like high attack speed build or something. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure you should still go IE because she still needs to kill squishies sometimes, and if you're not critting, you're not going to kill squishies. And then she gets a buff to her R. Gets an extra 4 seconds if someone dies after being hit by her recently. Doesn't go past the full duration, but hey, she gets to kind of go infinite-ish on her ultimate. That's kind of cool. Net result, I think, is actually end up being, I want to say slight Caitlyn, or slight Vayne nerfs, just because she's probably still going to go for the IE build. Maybe I'm wrong. Buffs to Veigar. 25 range, more health regen, more health regen. Here's that table. It's 20 to 13% more health regen, so he's a stronger laner. He survives lane more. And that's just good, right? Because Veigar just wants to survive lane and get the farm going on, so he's less abused by bad matchups. Cool. Maybe you get to see him a little bit more. I think he's slightly weak, but not terrible. And then he also no longer has a cooldown rank up on his W, so he's almost definitely maxing it last, because E does have a rank up incentive. And he gets 10% multiplicative cooldown off the W every 50 stacks of his passive. Now, it does take a while to get stacks of the passive, certainly. 50 last hits with Q, 10 assists or whatever. Takes some time to get to, but certainly this is going to, stack up to, 10 and then 19 and then 28% pretty reliably. W is going to be cast a lot more. Again, it's going to, for like most intensive purposes, like in the mid game, it's like a 25-35% cooldown difference. You're not going to get those 0-second dark matters reliably at all, But hey, still cool. Straight buffs to Veigar, quite obviously. That's quite nice. Ardent Sensor. Ardent Sensor nerfs. Oh, baby. It's getting the scaling back, but it's losing the on-hit heal. Worth pointing out, the on-hit heal was probably the single best stat it gave. Even though it wasn't raw lifesteal, let's think about it. A Bloodthirster's 20% lifesteal. If you're doing on average 200 damage per hit, you're getting 40 health back. But that's 40 health back if they have no armor. So if you do 200 damage on your auto attacks with Bloodthirster lifesteal against 100 armor, you're getting 20 life back. I'm pretty sure that's how the math works, right? Because I'm pretty sure lifesteal is after armor. I'm pretty certain. Pretty certain. So if you were just getting 25 life back on hit, you got a Bloodthirster worth of regen. And keep in mind, like, you got 25 attack damage too and 25 attack speed. Like, this was the single best part of the item. So even though the scaling comes back in and, you know, now it's, you know, all kinds of wonderful and fun and stuff like that, you can have 35 attack speed and whatever else because it scales with the target level. It no longer heals you an insane amount. Is Ardent Sensor still a good item? Of course it's still a good item. Ardent Sensor has always been a good item, just no one ever bought the thing. But now it's nerfed back to like the original version of the item in itself. Okay, great. Bramble Vest, losing some efficiency. Damage return goes down, combined cost goes up. No longer Grievous Wounds minions, whatever. Thornmail gets 5 armor because it itself was actually pretty inefficient. So let's look at the table of comparing these items to one another. So Bramble Vest was actually 77% efficient in the old version, and you only paid 200 gold for Grievous Wounds and the 20 damage Thorns. 20 damage, right? Yeah, 20 damage Thorns. You only paid 200 gold for Grievous Wounds and Thorns. That's pretty good. Now you're paying 300 gold for Grievous Wounds and Thorns, which obviously is still worth it if you need that. But the Thorns got a little bit weaker, and, you know, the Grievous Wounds are the same. You're paying 300 gold for it. So, okay, Bramble Vest is a little bit more fair. Okay. What's interesting though is if you look at Thornmail itself, I actually rolled the armor of the item itself into the Thorns damage. Right? If we looked at 718, you're paying 2.5 times as much for maybe double the Thorns damage and the same Grievous Wounds. It's like, well, why the hell would I upgrade Thornmail then? That seems terrible. And I would agree with you. That sounds terrible. So in 719, you're paying 300 gold for Grievous Wounds and Thorns. You are now actually doubling or more the Thorns damage. You're getting the same Grievous Wounds for 433. And this feels like a more fair cost comparison. This feels more reasonable, more fair. So, right, this lines up with expectations of what was actually going to be good item purchasing. And yeah, 300 gold to like hard screw over a Fiora, you know, a little bit more fair to do it that way. So glad to see this change, right? This means Fiora is a stronger champion, quite obviously, or anyone else who required to lifesteal in lane. But Bramble Vest is clearly still viable, right? If you look at like an Executioner's Calling, you're paying more than that much gold for just the Grievous Wounds and nothing else. So this item is still quite efficient. It's maybe harder to apply, which, you know, that's meaningful, I guess. Anyway, that's Bramble Vest and Thornmail. Thornmail, less of a trap. Bramble Vest still worth buying. Buffs to Edge of Night. It's the only one that's really not getting bought, so Spell Shield lasts longer. The cooldown goes down a little bit. That's pretty cool. I think it's fair. I mean, it seems like Lethality Assassins are doing fine in general, right? Duskblade got its last little nerf, and then everyone's like, yep, we're good. No one's abusing it anymore. We're good. All right. Nerfs to Righteous Glory, definitely an over-purchased item. Yeah, arguably over-purchased. It's definitely like really good at forcing. Okay, you know, they have their own context. Sorry, I'm kind of losing steam on like explaining things. It's a pretty simple nerf. It's down 150 gold. Here's the table. Righteous Glory was 105% gold efficient. Now it's 99% gold efficient. This assumes, of course, you care about the health regen and the mana on it, but you probably should because health regen and mana are good stats. Great, there you go. There's the efficiency table. A little bit different. What I'm excited about is Zeke's Convergence getting buffed, because Zeke's Convergence is pretty sweet. So first off, it's getting a cost decrease of 150. Now when you pop the item for your ally, their actual damage output is quite a bit higher, because before you did a very small amount up front, and then a lot of it was still a burn. Now you get half of the total damage up front, and then the other half is still a burn. So that's nice, right? Instead of being 13, instead of basically being, what, 1/3 upfront, 2/3 burn, it's now half upfront, half burn. So high attack speed champions get more and more out of this. That's a straight buff. And also the support no longer has to auto-attack the champion that was burning. Just simply being in range of them makes this item a Sunfire Cape that slows more. So both of these are pretty meaningful buffs. This is a meaningful buff. And Zeke's Convergence is now an item that is more than 100% gold efficient. Again, you have to care about mana and CDR, but you're certainly going to care about magic resist and armor. So, and you know, very little of the item's gold budget is in mana and CDR. CDR you obviously care about. Mana is only 350. You care about the item. You have to. You care about the item. It's definitely good. And now the passive's good. So I mean, it's funny because some people are like complaining horribly about like, oh, it's the 80 carries, OP meta or whatever. What's nice is Ardent Sensor and Zeke's Convergence pretty much never overlap. I guess Rakan can do it, but that's like almost it. I like, yes, you could do like Bond of Stone Alistair, but I don't know, dude. I don't believe in that much for like the Ardent Sensor healing. Zeke's Convergence though, right? You know, tanks are now more likely to have an item. Like if they are going to play with Twitch, right? Braum and Alistar and Nautilus are better Twitch supports than just playing Janna and getting Ardent Sensor. Now Zeke's is actually kind of more usable in that regard. So I think that's cool. I think those are nice things. So cool. Go Zeke's. Buy that item. I think it's a good item. Spell shields fixed up to actually now only block one spell at a time. Before they could block multiple if they landed at like the same frame. It was a very small window, but it could happen. So that's kind of nice. Nexus Siege back in a rotating game mode. More things to ping on the scoreboard. Account transfers disabled throughout the preseason, or the end of the season, I should say. Cool stuff in Champion Select for North America. I believe this is NA only. I could be wrong. Or it's everywhere. I forgot. I'm sorry. Anyway, either way, cool sorting stuff doing here. That's pretty nice. Bunch of bug fixes. You can read them yourself if you want to. I'm not going to go through them. Cool Singed. Awesome stuff right there. And some chromas as well for the Janna and the E skins that came out. So, sweet. That's the patch. A good old hour-long video. To be fair, there were like 4 reworks in this patch, so it took a while. And then I also lost some steam at the end. But let me know if you liked the video. All my social media stuff is way over there on that side of the video. If you want to say hi, tell me how I did, leave some comments below. Tweet me, tell me I'm amazing or terrible. All of them are okay. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.